Blessings in the name of the Lord Jesus. Welcome to Paraclet TV, making disciples through the power of the Holy Spirit. Our lesson intended learning objectives for our session in this video. We have number one. At the end of the session, 100% of the learners with 100% level of proficiency will be able to discuss the SR theory of Skinner and to apply the SR theory in the class. So obviously, based from our objectives, our focus or our subject matter will be dealing with the SR theory of Skinner. And let me first introduce to you who is the proponent of the SR theory. His full name is Varus Frederick Skinner, and he is an American psychologist, behaviorist. He's also an author of books, inventor, and social philosopher. He was the professor of psychology at Harvard University from 1958 until his retirement in 1974. He experimented, or Bruce Skinner experimented on operant conditioning. He was born on March 20, 1904 at Susquehanna, Pennsylvania, United States, and died in 1990. Now, Bruce Skinner introduced his box, and this is called the Skinner's box. And we will find that in his experiment, these are now the parts of the Skinner's box. We have the speaker, we have the signal lights, and then you have also the lever where the objective of the rat inside the Skinner's box is to touch it. Then we have the Pillay dispenser, and then we have the dispenser tube. We had the food cup. Then there is also an electric grid to shock generator. So let us look at how did Skinner conduct this experiment. In this Skinner's box, we will find that he called it an operant conditioning chamber, or also called the Skinner's box, and where there is the rat inside the box, and of course the rat, which is the subject of the experiment, must learn how to touch the lever, and after touching the lever, of course, the food will be released from the Pillay dispenser, and that will serve as the reward. And not only that, you will find that once the lever is touched and the Pillay was already released by the dispenser, automatically the electric grid will also be turning off. So the stimulus, of course, will be the rat as it touch, of course, the lever, and the response, of course, when the lever is touched, the response of the Pillay dispenser will be releasing the Pillay, and of course, there will also a corresponding response from the electric grid, as well as the rat to eat the Pillays that are released by the dispenser. This we will find the two kinds of reinforcement. We have the so-called positive reinforcement, in which in experiment, the rat is awarded with food when he pressed the lever. So the food serves as the positive reinforcement when the rat pressed the lever. And not only that, there is also a negative reinforcement that happens when the lever is touched. It is about that the rat was able to turn off electric shocks produced by the floor by pressing the lever. So the positive reinforcement in the Skinner's box is, of course, the food that is released, and of course, the negative reinforcement is the turning off of the electric grid. Now, in this experiment, we will find that Skinner's has three conditioning that happens, and this conditioning happens in three contingencies, and he called this as the ABCs of behavior. And we have the A, which stands for antecedent, then the B stands for behavior, and C stands for consequences. When the rat, of course, touches the lever, we will find that the antecedent is already there. The antecedent is the accidental touching of the lever that results to the release of food in turning off of the electricity. So the antecedent is, of course, the accidental touching of the lever. And then once the antecedent is already conducted, there will be a behavior. This will now be the response of the rat. And because of the rewards, the positive and the negative reinforcement that he receives, the rat will keep on touching the lever till he will be conditioned to do so. So that's about the change of behavior on the rat when he finds out that there are rewards upon touching the lever. And of course, the consequences, the food's coming out and the electricity keeps on turning off. Now, this is now an organizer based from the experiment of Skinner. The Skinner theory, which is the SR theory, is also called the operant conditioning. And in an operant conditioning of Skinner, there are two major elements. We have the reinforcement, and then the other one is punishment. In the reinforcement, we have also two kinds. You have the positive reinforcement and the negative reinforcement. When the positive reinforcement or the S serves as the stimulus is presented, the behavior is increasing. And while the negative or stimulus is removed, then the behavior also increases because these reinforcement are of course aimed to increase the behavior of the subject or of the individual in terms of classroom. And in the experiment of Skinner, this refers to the behavior of the rat. Now, about the punishment, there are also positive and negative punishment. And besides the reinforcement, we can also find another element which is called punishment. And if the reinforcement is used to increase the behavior of the subject, in case of the experiment of operant conditioning or of Skinner, the purpose of the reinforcement is to increase the behavior that is developed from the subject, while the punishment is the vice versa of the reinforcement. In the punishment, there are also two kinds. We have the positive reinforcement, the positive punishment, and we have also the negative punishment. And the positive punishment or the stimulus, when it is presented, its purpose is to decrease the behavior, as well as when it is removed, it also purports to decrease the behavior. Now, we will find that the theory of behaviorism, which is also which was discussed in the other video about Watson as well as Thorndike, they're also Skinner is also their comrades in the theory of behaviorism. And it is also believed that in this theory, the SR pattern, or there is also a zero in on observable behavior. When this, the behavior, of course, is the main focus of the SR pattern. There must have an apparent or an obvious behavior that will happen to the subject. Skinner studied about operant behavior, and when we speak about operant behavior, it means that it is the voluntary behaviors used in the operating the environment. It is a voluntary behavior. Say, for example, in the case of the experiment, the operant behavior, there is obviously the touching or of course, or the pressing of the lever. And when it is, of course, pressed, he will always do it again because of the rewards that the rat is received. that in the studied in the operant behavior, learning is a result of the change in overt or observed clear behavior. Okay. The changes and the behavior are the results of individual response to event that occur in the environment. So based from the experiment, it is according to Skinner, it was found out that the changes of the behavior are results of the individual response to events that occur in the environment. Whatever environment it is, when if it is the environment is the workplace, or the environment is just the house, or the environment is, of course, the classroom, we will find that the behavior or the changes in an individual depends upon the kind of environment that they are in. Now, in the school, we will find these are the following example of the behavior, or we can say this is as the operant behavior. We have the hitting the ball, defining a word, solving a problem, or even dancing pandango, and so many other things. Can you think of another example that are examples of operant behavior in the classroom? Now, in this theory, or in the SR theory of Skinner, there are important terms that you have to remember. One is the reinforcement. No, it is the key element in Skinner's SR theory. The reinforcement, of course, in his experiment is the fillet, or the fillet, or the food that serves as the reward. There are types of reinforcement. We have the passive reinforcement. Say, for example, a passive reinforcement is a stimulus that is given or added to increase the response. Example of that, we have merits, gifts, phrases in the school. This happens in the classroom. Then the negative reinforcement, a stimulus that results in the increased frequency of a response when it is withdrawn or removed. Let's have an example. Say, for example, a student received 1.5 grade in successive long quizzes. So a negative reinforcement can be he will be exempted in the final exam because of his grades that are higher during the summative examinations. The negative reinforcement is not taking the exam, but a reward for his working hard. Then next term that you have to remember in Skinner's theory, punishment. No, punishment is a consequence intended to result and reduce responses. And when, of course, there is a reinforcement and there are also punishment, there must have a shaping of behavior. In that experiment, an animal in a cage will learn that pressing a lever will produce food. To accomplish the shaping of behavior, successive approximation are rewarded until the animal learns the association between the lever and the food reward. So when the rat learns that upon pressing the lever, the food will come out from the fillet container. So the rat will do it again and again because he will, of course, receive the food again and again. Then we have also the so-called behavioral chaining. What is behavioral chaining? When a series of steps are needed to learn. Example, in the experiment of Skinner, the animal masters each step in sequence until the entire sequence is learned. It is said that practice makes perfect. What are the steps that took place within the Skinner's back? Example, the rat turn in the direction of the lever. That is step one. And then the rat moves towards the lever, the second step. Then brushing against the lever will be the third. And then the last one is pressing the lever. So these are the different steps that are mastered, the sequences of steps that are mastered by the rat. And it is called behavioral chaining. And there is also an important term in this theory as experimented by Skinner. We have the so-called reinforcement schedule. Under this, there are different types of schedule that can be done when it is being applied in the classroom. We have the so-called fixed interval schedule. When we say fixed interval schedule, time allowed is fixed. Say, for example, before the development of the lesson, you are going to have the reinforcement, or after the giving of the quiz, there is always a reinforcement. Now, there is the so-called also variable interval schedule, wherein the reinforcement is given in different times, not in a fixed, but in different times. And then we have also the fixed ratio schedule, that the food is given to the rat or bird if press delivered 5 times. So the fixed ratio schedule is you are scheduling how many times that the in application in the classroom, how many times that the students will get, say for example, a perfect score, and then he will be given an additional merit or additional points uh, for the for his final grade. And then we have, of course, variable ratio schedule. So, of course, it is somewhat similar with the variable interval schedule, which is number 2. The food is given to the bird or to the rat in different manners. Example, after 3 times, the food is given to the bird, next after 4 times, and next after 5 times. So this also happens inside the classroom, wherein it depends upon the decision of the teacher when to give the reinforcement. Now, let us look at the implications of the operant conditioning by Skinner. This is very useful in the program instructions in the school, whatever level we can use this. It is said that based from the operant conditioning or the experiment of Skinner, we have number 1, practice. You take the form of question, or the stimuli and answer frames exposes students to gradual steps. So meaning we have to really have a very effective questioning, which will serve as the stimulus, or which will serve as the stimuli, and the answer for our students, of course, will be considered as the response. And it depends upon how clear our question is, so that the students will also have a correct response. Second, it requires that the learner makes a response for every frame and receives immediate feedback. So like in the experiment, as the rat presses the lever, there is of course a still response in which the food is being released, and so the response, of course, of the rat is of course positive. In questioning, if the students have already answered our question in the classroom, you must all, of course, give an immediate feedback about the answer of our students. Because our praises will serve as, of course, a stimulus for the students to keep on performing in the class. Say, for example, the usual praise that we give, very good, or good, you have a point, amazing answers, and so many other words that serves as immediate feedback. Or you can have another feedback by giving a probe question to clarify his point. Then number 3, try to arrange the difficulty of questions so that the response is always correct. And this is also called a positive enforcement or reinforcement. So of course, the teacher must know how to identify the questions that he is giving to different students. When you know that the students are achieving high in the class, you can raise the type of question that you can give them. You can ask them the how and the why. But if you know the student is so passive, you can at least give him a question of, say, for example, a selected response question, wherein the student, because of low performing, and you want him to really express himself, so you can give choices for him just to choose just a word answer. And then time will come that you're going to raise your questions regarding the students. So the difficulty of questions depend upon the taxonomy of objectives that we are using, especially in the cognitive domain. So whatever level of objectives we have, that's also the level of questions. And it must, of course, depends upon the ability of our students to answer. Next, number 4, ensure that good performance is paired with secondary enforcement such as verbal praise, prizes, and good grades. So these are examples of secondary reinforcement: verbal praise, prizes, and good grades. So prizes can be in the form of, I remember that my teacher in elementary, she gave us caramel candy, one candy for correct answer, or you will be given, you can give also a star in elementary that is being used in preschool, a star on the arm, or whatever prize you can give. And of course, at the end of the grading period, you can, of course, give a positive grade in all the written outputs, or even in recitation, and the final grade, of course, is higher. And these are the principles that we have learned from the SR theory, or the operant conditioning of Skinner. One, behavior that is positively reinforced will reoccur. Intermittent reinforcement is particularly effective. So when a behavior, of course, is reinforced positively, it will reoccur. So meaning, when you give an assignment, the students has made an assignment and you have given a reinforcement, you have checked the assignment or given him additional grade, then it will, of course, reoccur again and again. And of course, intermittent enforcement, meaning you must always be consistent in giving reinforcement for the students to always be motivated in the class. Number 2, information should be presented by small amounts so that the responses can be reinforced. Example of this is when we give our directions to our students. The direction should be clear. It must be short and precise. So especially when we give directions in not only in the assessment paper in pencil test, but of course, when we ask our students to do a group activity, one direction must at once have a response for the students, so that they will not forget if we give many directions. No. So avoid giving too much directions. Make it simple so that the students will shape the behavior easily. Reinforcement will generalize across similar stimuli, producing secondary conditioning. And that's the third one. Okay. Share Jesus.
Subscribe and
Subscribe and
share
share
Paraclet
Paraclet TV.
TV.
Go, go, go.